Hello and welcome to India's World. Last week on October 13th, China operationalized its 510 megawatt Zangmu Dam in Tibet on the Brahmaputra River, or the Yarlung Sangpo as it is known in Tibet. The commissioning of Zangmu and the possibility of other dams coming up on the Brahmaputra has raised concerns in India. These relate to the likely impact on water flow in the lower reaches of the river, as well as the apprehension about China using water during times of conflict to create flooding downstream. Three of the proposed dams, Jaishu, Zangmu and Jiacha, are within 25 kilometers of each other and only 550 kilometers from the Indian border. However, besides Zangmu, which has now been fully commissioned, construction has not begun on any of the other dams as yet. Any significant diversion or retention of water could impact hydroelectric projects downstream, especially the Upper Siang and the Lower Subansiri projects in Arunachal Pradesh. India and China do not have any river water sharing agreements. What they do have is an understanding to share flood data on some of the rivers originating in Tibet. To discuss Indian concerns about Chinese dam building activities on the Brahmaputra, we have with us three distinguished experts. We have with us Ambassador T.C. Rangachari, a distinguished diplomat. He was India's ambassador to Germany and France. He was head of the China desk at the Ministry of External Affairs. He is a distinguished fellow currently at the Vivekananda International Foundation in New Delhi. Professor Alka Acharya, she is the director of Institute of Chinese Studies in New Delhi, as well as Professor of Chinese Studies at the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. And Mr. Seshadri Chari, he is Chief of the Foreign Affairs Cell of the BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, and also the Executive Director of a think tank, the Forum for Strategic and Security Studies. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ranga, let me begin with you. Do you think that the mainstream Indian reaction to China commissioning the Zangmu Dam has been knee-jerk and paranoid? I mean, after all, China has responded by saying it's a run-of-the-river project and that it will take care of all the Indian concerns, that full account of Indian concerns will be taken on board.
Well, let's look at it from both points of view. From the Indian point of view, in UP there is a saying that माँ भी बच्चे को दूध तब पिलाती है जब बच्चा रोता है. Therefore, if there is a problem that we perceive as a problem from the Indian side, we have concerns in regard to whatever it may be, whether it is defense, whether it is security, whether it is environmental considerations, economic considerations, river water flows and so on, whatever the concerns may be. If we don't speak up, nobody else is going to speak up on our behalf. Therefore, if India says whatever it feels needs to be said on an occasion like this, then I don't think they should be considered as either paranoid or knee-jerk or whatever. That's point number one. Let's look at it from the Chinese point of view. First of all, I think we need to give credit to the Chinese. This is the highest dam that has been built anywhere in the world. So it is in many senses an engineering marvel. There is something to learn from that. And when you couple that with the railway line that has been built, let us look at our own side. We have been for several years now trying to build a railroad all the way to Srinagar, and the project has been stalled for a variety of reasons. So there is much to be learned.
Let's not go there, because it's got to do with the state systems being too different. But
not necessarily, but let's look at the other point that you raised in regard to it being a run-of-the-river project. Now, there are many people, experts insofar as river waters and so on are concerned, who will say that any tampering at all with the natural flow of a river is dangerous or is a matter of concern insofar as environmental considerations are concerned. As far as the water resource itself is concerned, Tibet, according to the Chinese side, is very, very rich in mineral resources, and one of the reasons why they are not in a position to exploit it is for lack of power. So there is a certain logic insofar as the Chinese are concerned. We don't necessarily have to accept it or subscribe to it unless our own interests are also protected, since not just the Brahmaputra, but there are several other rivers which flow from Tibet into India.
Okay. Alka, limiting ourselves to sort of dam construction activities, has India been caught unawares by Chinese dam construction activities in Tibet, or have we always been aware of it, or did we have to confront the Chinese with evidence?
I wouldn't say that we are unaware in the current scenario. There was a time when reports had started to surface that these dams, I'm talking of early 90s, mid 90s, at that point of time the Chinese had denied. However, the satellite pictures started to emerge and so on. So India has, I would say that for the last decade and a half, we have been aware that this has been going on. The Chinese have from time to time even announced some pretty intensive schemes in view of the water crisis in China. And we have now having a full range of dialogues on this issue. So very soon, I would say around the late 90s, this actually became an agenda between India and China in the dialogues. And then thereafter, we have been having agreements. So I don't say we've been caught napping or that we are unaware of, but given the highly technical nature of the subject, I think what would be fair to say is that there is a confusion as to what exactly is happening.
Let me take that question to Seshadri. Seshadri, there are 2 other dams besides Zangmu nearby which are planned, and there are 6 others, or some people say 22 others, some others say 38 other dams, and so on and so forth. So, is India worried about the number of dams or lack of information, technical and otherwise, about these dams?
Both. We are also worried about the number of dams, because as many as 52 is also what is being quoted, and some of the Chinese figures have come out on all these things. And again, the information, there is absolute lack of information on 2 counts. Number one, we really do not know what is really happening within the Chinese decision making process, although we know that it's a very complicated decision making process there. That's what they are doing. Number 2, the area in which these dams are being built is divided into 2 areas, that is the Tibet Autonomous Region and TAR, and the non-TAR but that part of Tibet region. Now, there is a dispute going on. We all know about it, whether we like it or not. Since 1958, this is under occupation. So, we have His Holiness the Dalai Lama here. We have a situation, Tibet was considered to be a buffer between India and China, and that's no longer existing. So, it has an ecological problem. It is also, and see, in the absence of any structured understanding between India and China on not only river water sharing basis, but also on other issues, especially sharing of information, as Ambassador Rangachari put it. In that case, it is all the more important that we should get information, because this affects not only just India, it affects Myanmar, it affects Laos, it affects Cambodia, it affects Vietnam, it affects Bangladesh. So, it's going to be a very serious matter as far as India-China agreement on these issues are concerned.
All right. We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing Chinese dam building activities on the Brahmaputra in Tibet. Ranga, let me ask you this. You said that there are experts, and who you clearly seem to subscribe to their views, that if there's any retention of water of a river, any diversion, it creates environmental problems. So, in the light of what you have said, why shouldn't one be skeptical about Indian objections to Zangmu when Prime Minister Modi's government has okayed a 3,300 megawatt dam on Dibang River without environmental assessment, without local consultation?
But you see, this is where you have to have a trade-off. If the thermal power is going to be polluting and therefore a concern from a different point of view, then you have to look for alternative sources which are quote-unquote
So, if we
clean.
do this, it's okay. If the Chinese do it, it is wrong.
No, I didn't say that what the Chinese said are doing is wrong or right. I'm simply saying that there are concerns from an environmental point of view which are voiced by experts, and this is also something that needs consideration. And in the case of Tibet, perhaps more than in other places downstream, because of the fact that this is, quote-unquote roof of the world, and because there is, the glaciers melting, Himalayas, and then you have so many rivers which originate in Tibet, perhaps the concerns have more validity than they would have in other parts, which might only affect locally. Whereas here, as earlier also, like Chari was pointing out, it's not just an India-China thing, it's a more broad-based regional issue that may have to be dealt with.
We're just going to come to that. But Alka, let me ask you this. Why does Beijing insist on absolute sovereignty over water when it goes against all international norms on transboundary river sharing, the rights of lower riparian states?
I think many countries are still, debating the pros and cons of coming to some kind of an international agreement. Even India does not take the view that this is, that this sovereign right has to be shared. I think India has also not signed the convention, the UN
Yet we have
convention.
transboundary river sharing agreements.
No, so therefore, there is a difference between discussing the matter with countries that are affected and coming to some kind of a common conclusion, and the matter that you said that there is an international binding convention, because even in the UN conventions you do not have strict laws stating that lower riparian states have a right to demand certain action from the upper riparian states. They can ask for information, they can ask for prior kind of. So I think this area is still quite grey. It's still in the process of being ironed out. I think the important thing that is we need to keep in mind when we are looking at frameworks is that can we have a collective process which affects, which brings in all the countries that are affected?
Yeah. But let me ask you this then. Do you know of any agreement that China signed on river water sharing? After all, the Mekong originates in the Tibetan plateau. There is a Mekong River Commission, which is really a river basin authority. So, except for Myanmar and China, all the other countries through which the Mekong flows are part of the commission: Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. China is only a dialogue partner. Became a dialogue partner 1 year after, 2 years after the Mekong River Commission was set up. So, there is no instance to my mind of China showing any willingness to become part of the kind of collective or multilateral understanding that Alka is talking of.
Yeah, till about 90s, actually, China was under the impression that we are not responsible for anybody. We are not answerable to any of these countries. We have a sovereign right over all this property that belongs to us, including the river, the mountains, and every other situations. Like animals and weather, they don't respect borders. So obviously, you cannot stop the flow of the river. But Mekong is the 12th largest river, incidentally. But Mekong has created a number of problems downstream. And after these problems were highlighted, and when some of these countries, of course, they could not really stand up to the might of China as far as the economic issues were concerned. But it was Myanmar to some extent and also Vietnam to a very large extent that stood up against China and then made them agree to certain formalities at least. But otherwise, there is no structured dialogue or any agreement between these countries. And this is one of the reasons why these countries, especially the Mekong River Delta area, Bangladesh, are all waiting for India to raise this issue.
Bangladesh for other reasons, not Mekong, but
Two very quick points. First of all, the Chinese say that we are taking fully into account the Indian concerns. This is still a unilateral position. We need to have a structured discussion, and we need to have on the basis of an informed opinion. That is to say that we get information from the Chinese side and then we come to a conclusion. We need to have some kind of an understanding as to how the waters in the Tibetan region are going to be exploited in the future. That's one. Secondly, in the context of this One Belt, One Road proposal which Xi Jinping has now made, he has talked in terms of harmonization of a variety of things, financial policies, customs, transportation systems, etc. and so on. Now, if you can talk about harmonization and bringing everybody together on an issue like that, why not insofar as waters are concerned?
absolutely.
Brahmaputra requires some more attention because unlike Mekong or any other river, Brahmaputra has a very unique characteristic of changing its course every year.
And
so it becomes even more
on the Indian side or in the Tibetan side?
Even on the Tibetan side.
See, I think what we need to bring into focus here is that while there is this question of upper and lower riparian, after all, China is upper to us and we are upper to Bangladesh. So it's a kind of a complex situation. But the Brahmaputra and the Tibetan plateau, which was mentioned earlier, is very critical to the ecosystem of the entire continent. And therefore,
my question to you is: do we have any kind of understanding? Because you said there are dialogues going on, there are understandings and agreements. Can you tell me if there is a single agreement? Or what kind of dialogue is there? What kind of exchange of information is there with China?
At the moment, there is only an understanding that China will release data about the flow of water that comes between May and October to India on payment.
On payment terms.
On Brahmaputra or on Satluj also?
No, Brahmaputra. Yeah. So this is the only thing.
But there's been sharing of data on Satluj also in Himachal after the Himachal flood.
That was only for that particular episode, which had actually flooded over and created such chaos. So it was only for that. Okay. But as far as Brahmaputra is concerned, there is an agreement. Now, see, somewhere the point is that both India and China need to come out very clear. See, so much of confusion. What is exactly the official position? From the Indian position, you don't see any alarmist view coming out, nothing, no paranoia. They are saying we've been given this assurance by the Chinese. Chinese are taking calmly. Strategic thinkers are giving you different pictures. Environmentalists are raising cane about this whole thing. Somewhere an official perspective from both sides, which gives you the exact position so that we can then take the matter forward.
All right. Okay, we need to take a break again at this point. We'll be back again in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing Chinese dam building activities in Tibet on the Brahmaputra. Branga, why has China been reluctant to agree to an Indian suggestion to set up a joint expert level mechanism for sharing even hydrological data?
Well, I think this is not only in the case of river waters. By and large, China has been very protective of what it considers to be its prerogative, its sovereignty, and so on. So I would be very happy if in fact the Chinese side would agree to this, because I think, as we were discussing a little earlier, it would show that there is some sense of accountability to other partners also. Unilateral declaration saying that we'll take into account your concerns is not enough. Okay. You have to move forward and make the transition to the next step and have a discussion and be able to be on the same page following those discussions and have a mutually satisfactory arrangement.
Yeah, okay. Alka, do you see that someday China would agree to Indian officials, going and inspecting the projects on the Brahmaputra, and if a dispute arose, going to a third party for mediation? After all, if we couldn't do it with Pakistan and we've fought 4 or 5 wars with them, why can't we work out such a mechanism with China? Do you see that happening ever?
I do, for 2 reasons. One is that I think the political understanding between India and China has to logically lead to a point where the free and frank discussions on issues of mutual concern have to be taken to the next level. Number 2, there is now a huge amount of groundswell, both in India and China, environmental, within Tibet, for instance, or even ecologists all over, about the kind of impact that this fiddling around with the ecosystem of the third pole is going to create. And this is building pressures on governments. The Chinese are not going to be immune to the people's power. Okay. Tibetan lives are being disrupted. Desertification of Tibet is happening. And when the pressure comes up, surely I think the question is going to get opener.
Okay. We are really running out of time. So quick answer from you, Seshadri. So if a third person, somebody from Mars were to come, and they would say, actually India and China are in a race to build dams on the Brahmaputra, because we are talking about Chinese 52 dams, I don't know what the real figure is. But India is planning 160 dams on Brahmaputra and its tributaries. So together, India and China, do you think they might impact another lower riparian, the Bangladesh, and they have no voice in this at all?
No, they do have a voice, and we are concerned about it. We have kept the Bangladesh administration very much in the loop as far as these issues are concerned. I think what happens with China is we don't seem to be using our leverages with China. We should tell the Chinese that if it will be in the interest of the entire region, that 2 very important and big countries like India and China sit together and talk of all these things, especially when it is going to affect the entire region. And if China is not in the mood or position to share information with us and start discussing, I think we will have to use some of the leverages, like we can have a rethink on BCIM project.
Which I think we already are having, but anyway, we've run out of time. Thank you very much, Seshadri, Chari, Professor Alka, Acharya, Ambassador TCA Rangachari, for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again as usual next week. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching India's World.